Translating the Niphal, reflexive. So, when you have a reflexive, the subject is acting on itself, and usually in English anyway, you restate the object with a reflexive pronoun like himself. He did something to himself. An example, we have Machar, he sold. Okay, he sold apples in the market or something. Now here, this would be, if you translate it as a reflexive, he sold, get my brush back, he sold not apples, but he sold himself, presumably into slavery. That's a reflexive, where the subject is doing the action, but doing the action back on himself. Okay, he sold himself. Here he's selling something else. Now, just looking at this here, you can't tell. Is this he sold himself or he was sold? He was sold would be passive. He sold himself would be reflexive. So it's only context that tells you which way to go with these things. The morphology, the letters here, it doesn't tell you which way to translate it, obviously. You have to depend on the context to tell you, is this a passive or a reflexive or whatever. Again, look it up in the dictionary as well, because some verbs won't have or are not used as reflexives, for instance. So dictionaries can help you. Ga'al, he redeemed. So he redeemed something. And as a reflexive, he redeemed himself. If it was a passive, again, it would be he was redeemed. But if you want to translate this, if your context is driving you to translate as a reflexive, then it would be he redeemed himself. Now, these categories, passive, reflexive, they're really categories we have in English. So what we're talking about is a form in Hebrew that we translate into various forms in English. Because they have these different nuances within Hebrew as well. But these forms themselves are really more English forms. So he redeemed himself. What we see in both of these reflexives is that we have this thing here, this reflexive pronoun. That's how we write a reflexive in English. We have to put this object here. He redeemed, or he sold himself, or he redeemed himself. Now, there's something similar to a reflexive called a middle. And if you have taken Greek, you'll know all about the middle, because middles are distinguished by form, at least in some verbs. It's a much bigger deal in Greek, but you have it you have the possibility in Hebrew as well. So, and some would call this example a middle. We have ra'ah, he saw. And this is not he saw himself. This is he appeared. Now you can see how it's related to seeing. Here it's active in the cow. He saw the tree. Here it's he appeared, but it's not he saw himself. That would be a true reflexive, like we had back here. He redeemed himself. He saw himself. The meaning of this verb in the Niphal, and again you look it up in the dictionary to tell you, he appeared. So it's not really a reflexive, it's more of a middle. Now I lumped it in here because Ross just has the 3 basic categories, which is probably a good idea when you start to just have some basic categories. Passive, reflexive, reciprocal. But I just want to mention that there's some other nuances as well. And this is an example. If you're not familiar with what a middle is, don't worry about it. Your context often will push you in a certain direction and you won't even realize what the actual theoretical name is for it. It doesn't really matter. And of course your dictionary, again, will tell you how to translate these verbs. Another example of a middle, we have shavar, he broke. So let's say he broke the vessel, he broke the jar. That's active, right? So that's in the cow. Now here I put a true subject there. Nishbar hakili. Kili is vessel, the vessel, or the utensil, something like that. The vessel broke. That would be a a way to translate if you want to translate as a middle. The vessel broke. We are talking about an action. The vessel broke, but the vessel didn't break itself. That would be reflexive. Just the vessel broke. Now, this sentence by itself, or these two words, you could potentially translate this. The vessel was broken. That would be passive. That's what we did in the last module. The vessel broke doesn't really feature the agent as much as the passive does. And if this was a different subject, you could say the vessel broke itself, which would be reflexive. But vessels don't tend to break themselves because they're not animate. So anyway, again, don't get too hung up on these labels. It's good to know the three basic ones: passive, reflexive, reciprocal, which we'll deal with in the next section. But be aware that there are nuances to these things as well. Use your dictionary and use your context to tell you.